Crown and silence, immersive audio stories.
Thursday, the 18th of November, 1908. The scullery was no longer enough. She had become two shadows of herself. One in the darkness, the girl who stood with bleeding fingers, scrubbing grease from pots in ice-cold water. One in the light, the girl who moved through the silent, carpeted corridors of the upper floor, breathless, watchful. The sick housemaid had given Lily double the work, no extra wage, no rest, just more of everything. The morning began in the scullery. Her body was already a broken arch. Her knees ached as if they were carrying someone else's weight. She carried in the coal. She pumped the water, basin after basin. The water was so cold it stole the feeling from her hands and left them like stiff blue-violet claws. 62 pots were waiting. The sand and vinegar tore at yesterday's open wounds. Blood seeped from beneath her fingernails. She clenched her teeth and kept scrubbing. Just as her legs began to give way, the sound came. A sharp metallic bell, cutting through the silence of the house like a knife through cloth. His bell. Mrs. Hargreaves appeared in the doorway instantly, as if she had been drawn there by the sound. A dark bird with hard eyes.
Lord Harrington is ringing. Newspapers. Go.
Lily wiped her bleeding hands against her dirty apron and ran for the narrow servants' staircase. Every step sent a dull pain up through her forearms. The staircase wound upward like a secret passage in the house. Dark, damp. She was gasping by the time she reached the top, not from lack of air, from pure nerve. The upper floor was waiting, and so was he. He sat at the desk, pen in hand, bent over his papers as if the world outside did not exist. He did not look up when she entered, not even a shift in his gaze. The Times, the Yorkshire Post. The words fell quietly, as if directed not at a person, but at the air itself. Lily placed the newspapers carefully beside his arm, curtsied, and began to turn to leave. Stay. The word was low, but it cut through the room and stopped her like a hand pressed against her chest. She froze mid-movement and turned slowly back. Pour the water from the carafe. The carafe stood barely half a meter from his hand, cut glass catching the light in small, ice-cold glints. He made no move to reach for it. He simply sat there and waited, as if time belonged to him. It was a test, or something even simpler, a demonstration of how little he needed to do to make her move. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the carafe, but she held it steady. the water ran silently down into the glass. Not a single drop spilled. A thought ignited inside her, hot and dangerous. How can a man be so idle that he cannot even lift his own carafe? She curtsied quickly and left the room as fast as her legs would carry her. An hour later, the bell rang again. The same sharp tone, the same jolt in her chest. She ran. Tea and a biscuit on the tray. She set it down. This time he looked up. His gaze met hers and held. Cold, measuring, as if he were weighing something invisible inside her. It did not look away. It moved across her face and stayed 1 second too long. "You are quick," he said at last. "I appreciate quickness." She curtsied. "Thank you, my lord." But inside, a thought, raw, silent. "I run like a dog. You do not move at all." The rest of the day dissolved into a haze, a single grinding chain of bells and running. 10 minutes for her own dinner, cold potatoes and water thrown into her stomach while she stood bent over a sink. Then up with his lunch on the silver tray, 3 courses, always 3. The bell rang. Fetch his jacket. The bell rang. Serve whiskey in the library. The bell rang. Receive a letter from a messenger. The bell rang. Light the lamps in his room as dusk fell. Everything followed the same ritual. The bell, the running, the curtsy, his quiet, measuring gaze. And through all of it, a burning, defiant thought she could not smother. He does nothing. I do everything. At 6 o'clock, she was back in the hell of the scullery, sweating, thick with smoke. 94 plates waited, stacked like a mockery. The water was so ice-cold it made her hands stiff and blue, as if they no longer belonged to her. Then the floors. She dropped to her knees, and the skin split immediately against the cold stone. It bled, but she kept scrubbing, every stroke a streak of fire through her kneecaps. Then the slop buckets. She carried them out into the black, solid darkness behind the house. The ground was slick. The air froze in her lungs. The rats came first as shadows, then as sounds, quick, hungry feet darting across hers. She gasped and swallowed the scream, hard, as if it could have cost her her life. It was well past 10 when she finally dragged herself up to the attic. Her body was a single pulsing ache, feet swollen, hands raw and numb from cold and work. She sank onto the straw mattress and lit the candle stub. The flickering light threw pale shadows across the thin walls. The darkness felt alive, as if the house were holding its breath alongside her. Then the realization came, quiet as a knife point. He is master. I am nothing. She looked at her hands in the candlelight, dirty, wounded, nails blackened with blood and soot. Hands that looked as if they belonged only in the darkness. But a new thought pressed upward, stronger than the first, glowing, even though she could barely move her fingers.
Without me, without my hands, his fire would go out. His rooms would lie in darkness. His food would rot. Without me, he would wither. He is master, but I am necessary.
She looked at her hands again, ugly, destroyed, but strong. One day, she whispered against the howling wind outside. One day. The clock was approaching 11. In Lord Harrington's library, the air lay heavy and still, saturated with old leather, sweet tobacco smoke, and the sharp, clean note of whiskey. The gas lamps had been turned down to a low, golden glow, and the fire cast restless, trembling shadows across the tall bookshelves, as if the walls of the room were breathing. Lord Harrington sat deep in the leather armchair, his morning robe half open, the white linen shirt gleaming faintly in the light. He rolled the heavy whiskey glass slowly between his palms, as if warming something cold, his gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. Before him stood Mrs. Hargreaves, straight-backed, immovable, at least seemingly so. Her hands were clasped in front of her like a tightened lock, but in the firelight, her eyes betrayed something unfamiliar, a flickering uncertainty, so brief it could almost have been imagined. "The new girl," said Lord Harrington quietly, as if the words were part of the movement of the flames. He did not look at the housekeeper. He let his gaze rest in the fire. Grace, the girl from Whitechapel. Mrs. Hargreaves nodded stiffly, not daring to draw too deep a breath. "She did double work today," he continued, his voice low, without gesture. "The scullery and waiting. No complaints, no mistakes." He lifted the glass, let the whiskey roll against the rim, and drank. "I watched her," he said, slower now. "She carried coal, she scrubbed, she served me." A pause, barely perceptible. She did not tremble. At last he turned his gaze from the fire to the housekeeper. It was sharp, clean as a blade. "She advances," he said, "from tomorrow. Kitchen maid, directly under Mrs. Poole. Her wage rises to £18 a year. She is to have a uniform." A short pause. "She moves from the attic. Give her the room in the servants' corridor." If he had struck her across the face, she would have reacted less. Mrs. Hargreaves' lips drew together into a thin white line, as if she had swallowed something burning. Something moved in her chest, a hot, caustic feeling that tasted of vinegar and metal. Envy. 20 years she had served him. 20 years of blood and toil and silent discipline to keep the household in perfect order. And now this. "My lord," she said, her voice pressed to a thin thread of composure.
She has been here one day. There are rules, a hierarchy. The other girls will...
"I make the rules, Mrs. Hargreaves," He said it without raising his voice, but the words cut through the room like a blade. He leaned slowly forward, as if giving her one last chance to understand. And I break them when I choose. She swallowed hard. The battle was over before it had even taken shape. Yes, my lord. She drew her lips back into what was meant to be a smile. It was a rigid, terrible grimace that cracked without reaching her eyes. I will prepare her, she said quietly. Personally. Lily lay in the ice-cold darkness, her body heavy as lead. Every muscle felt as if it had been torn apart and sewn back together without anesthetic. Her raw hands pulsed with pain. She had just begun to sink into that dangerous, half-waking stupor, the kind that comes when the body can bear no more, when she heard them. Footsteps in the corridor. Slow, heavy, measured, as if someone were weighing each movement so that she would hear them. Lily went rigid. Her breath caught in her chest, narrow, sharp. The door creaked, a slow, plaintive sound, and began to open. Mrs. Hargreaves stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette cutting off the faint gaslight behind her. She filled the entire frame, as if the house itself had risen and taken shape in her body.
On your feet, girl.
The voice was low, poisonous, and carried an undertone of something that was no longer about work. Lily sat up so fast the straw mattress rustled like a scream in the darkness. Her heart beat hard and irregular, as if trying to escape through her ribs. She stared at the housekeeper, cold, alone in the shadow of the doorway. What had she done? Lord Harrington has spoken, said the housekeeper, each syllable honed like glass. She took one slow step into the darkness, and the room shrank around Lily. You have been given a new position, kitchen maid, from tomorrow. Lily stared, silent. The words had not yet landed.
A promotion?
Mrs. Hargreaves took another step. Her face lay in shadow, but the cold coming off her was almost physical, as if someone had opened a door to the winter wind and let it in directly against Lily's skin. But remember this, she whispered, so close that Lily felt her breath against her skin. He may have promoted you, but I see you. I see everything you do. Always. She drew back without turning her gaze away. The door slid shut behind her, a heavy, final click. Lily heard the sound of metal meeting wood. A lock turned with a decisiveness that could not be misunderstood. She was locked in. She lay in the darkness, her body shaking as if with fever. The tears that came now carried no softness. They burned their way out, sharp and ice-cold, born of pure fear. The clock in the corridor struck 5, each stroke a heavy hammer against her already aching body. Lily's eyes snapped open in the darkness. She had not slept. She had simply lain there, rigid as a board, listening for footsteps outside the locked door. The door that had held her prisoner through the night. A new sound came now. metal against metal, the key turning from the outside. The door was unlocked. No one opened it. No one said a word, but it was enough. She was free to go, or free enough to work. Her body screamed in protest as she rose, a dull, pulsing ache left over from yesterday's double labor. She threw on her dress. It was stiff with dried sweat and old dishwater. It clung to her skin like a cold, wet membrane. But this morning was different. It was 5:15 when Lily slipped out into the corridor. Mrs. Hargreaves was already there, motionless, like a statue carved from shadow. The gaslight traced a pale outline around her rigid figure. In her hands, she held a bundle of black and white fabric, the uniform, as if it was something sacred or dangerous. "Here," she said, her voice colder than the frost on the window pane. The uniform lay in her hands, a dress of new, stiff black cotton, a white apron so heavily starched it rustled like paper, a small cap, chalk white, untouched. Lily reached out and touched the fabric. It was clean, almost frightening in its cleanliness. "Your new room." Mrs. Hargreaves pointed to the door opposite, without changing her expression. Lily opened it. The room was small, but after the attic, it felt like a palace. A bed with a real mattress, soft cotton instead of straw. A chest with a small lock, her first possession that no one else could open. And a window, a whole window, clear, frost-free, letting in a thin strip of pale dawn light. She swallowed. A tear burned at the corner of her eye, a tear of raw, incomprehensible relief. She wiped it away quickly, before the housekeeper's gaze could catch it. At 5:30, Lily stepped into the kitchen and entered an entirely different world. The iron ranges already glowed like open jaws. The heat hit her so hard her eyes watered. The air was thick with the smell of fresh-baked bread, fried bacon, boiling stock, an overwhelming symphony of warmth and work. Mrs. Poole stood in the middle of it all like a general at the front line, face red, shouting at another girl. "There you are, kitchen maid no less." She looked Lily up and down. "Good. Start with the eggs. 10 minutes to the Lord's breakfast. 6 of them. 4 minutes. Not a second more. And slice the bread. Thin." Lily began without a word. She boiled the eggs, watching the second hand on the wall clock, as if every tick were a promise she had to keep. Then she sliced the bread. Thin, even slices, as if her hands had never trembled. The raw, wounded fingers obeyed her now. They were steady, decided. Her heart beat hard in her chest, not from fear, from something else, a fragile, almost dangerous pride. At 6 o'clock, Lily carried the heavy silver tray through the corridor, every step echoing like a measuring stroke of a clock. The dining room opened before her, a tall, cool space where the silence was almost sacred. Lord Harrington sat at the head of the table, the newspaper raised like a shield before his face. Lily curtsied, deep, precise, toward the white page of the newspaper. She set out the tea, the eggs, the bread, every movement so careful that the porcelain barely touched the cloth. In the doorway stood Mrs. Hargreaves, motionless, her gaze two cold daggers fixed in Lily's back. Just as Lily was about to set down the cup, it happened. Mrs. Hargreaves took one quick, almost predatory step forward and seized her arm. The grip was iron, fingers boring in like hooks beneath the skin. The shock made Lily gasp and flinch. The cup tilted. Several drops of hot tea splashed onto the chalk-white tablecloth, leaving brown, burning stains, as if her shame had bled through the fabric.
You forgot the sugar, girl.
The voice was low, a poisonous rasp, but pitched just loud enough for the Lord to hear every word. The newspaper lowered, slowly, as if even the silence made way for him. Lord Harrington's gaze was not raised in anger. It was heavier than that, like a storm that had already chosen its target. Mrs. Hargreaves. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that makes the air freeze. He rose and took the cane that rested against the table. Ebony, dark as night, a silver knob that caught the light and threw it back like ice. The blow came before Lily had drawn breath, fast as a whip crack, a black flash through the room. The cane struck Mrs. Hargreaves' hand directly across the knuckles, where she held Lily in her iron grip. The sound was sharp, a clean, dry crack that echoed between the walls. Mrs. Hargreaves released Lily instantly. She flinched, but did not make a sound. Her face had lost all color. She looked as if someone had pulled her through cold water. "You lie," said Lord Harrington. "Not in my house." Lord Harrington turned his gaze to Lily, his face still hard cut from stone, but something in his eyes had shifted. Not kindness, something closer to acknowledgement, cold and dangerous. "Continue your work, Miss Grace," he said. "You are doing excellently." The words fell heavy, almost like a hand placed on the back of her neck. Lily curtsied, deep but unsteady, her heart hammering as if trying to escape her chest. She seized the tray and fled the room, down the servants' staircase, as if the steps were the only thing keeping her upright. She had barely taken one step into the scullery when Mrs. Hargreaves slid in behind her, silent, fast, like a shadow that had torn itself loose from the wall. One of her hands was hidden in her apron pocket. The other seized Lily's free arm and pulled her backward with a hard, jerking grip. Her eyes burned with a hatred so pure it was almost cold. "You will not win this," she whispered, her breath hot against Lily's cheek, almost burning. "Not over me." Lily met her gaze. For the first time, she did not move it, did not look away. I don't want to win, she said, her voice low, but steady as a drawn wire. I just want to survive.
Crown and silence, immersive audio stories.